I believe that a lot of people are scared away from older or more affordable motorcycles because they're somewhat intimidated by carbs. That if anything ever goes wrong with them, which is kind of unlikely if you're actually riding a machine, that all of a sudden, in order to make things right, they're going to have to reference knowledge on things like the Bernoulli effect, the Venturi effect, lift properties of air density, signal frequency and amplitude, variables of vacuum, and even, a little black magic voodoo and witchcraft. And you know what? All of that is true. But that's if you're having to design and build one from scratch in order to repair it. What people seem to forget is designers design these things to be worked on by average humans. And the average human is stupid. You don't need to know any of that existential fluff in order to work on a carburetor. Yeah, a DIY tuning one of these things, it's not going to be good as a 100% race car team professionally tuned carburetor will work. But on the street, I doubt anybody would be able to tell the difference. So here's what you need to know. More educated people out there have done the hard thinking for you. They've come up with pictures with legends on the side to help you identify the parts that they are talking about in the instructions they give you, either through video or books. And for the most part, the parts in here that these smarter people have designed, they did it so that they aren't interchangeable because they knew we were stupid. So let's trust the smarter people. When we're tuning a carburetor, all we're talking about is taking it apart, either cleaning or replacing a part based upon what the smarter people tell us, and putting it back together. There's a little bit of tuning, but the machine itself will tell you how to do that. So if you can follow instructions and have a little bit of common sense, you can tune a carburetor. Now, cool thing about Sportsters is you only have one carburetor to deal with, unlike a lot of metric bikes where you might have 2, 3, 4, or even 6 carburetors that not only do you have a lot more of the repetitious work to do, but then you have to get them all to work together. With one carburetor, I mean, really, it's much easier. Plus, I like the Evo Sportsters because the carburetors they've been using for the past 20 years are the most refined version there is of the Harley-Davidson carburetor. They have taken all the guesswork out of it. Experts have gone over it so many years. There's so much information about it that you really, if you can follow instructions, can't get them too wrong because they're designed for meatheads like us. So in case you haven't been able to tell, in this episode of Motorcycle Ride, I'm going to be doing a carb clean. Not that it needs it. I mean, I haven't really touched this thing in the 16,000 miles since I did the first carb clean when I just got the bike and did its initial setup. But I'm taking some long trips this summer and I would just feel a little bit better about it. And I'm going to play with the jets a little bit, and I'll explain why later on. And all that is based upon what the machine and experts have told me to do. So these are the tools I expect to use in this. My ever-loving Tub Towels wipes, which I'll put a link down below. The more I've done mechanical work, the more I depend upon these. A couple screwdrivers, and you're definitely going to want to get an air screw mixture screwdriver. That's what these small ones is. And that clip that they come with, that is important. That's your referencing angle. So you definitely want to get one with a clip. I did go ahead and order a jet kit. Mainly, I just wanted a new a new gasket. But this comes with all the different sizes of jets, both the main and the idle. So, if you ever do want to change them out, or if you don't want to bother cleaning one, just put a new one in. Here you go. And of course, carb cleaner. Ever important carb cleaner. If you're doing one of these, go ahead and buy a new bottle and just assume that you're going to use it all up. Now, some things about my particular carburetor. I'm just taking off the drain line out of the float bowl right now. I'm going to go ahead and replace that because it's just old. But whenever I did the adjustment the very first time, I hate the fact that Harley set these up so that it was kind of set and forget, like things like your idle adjustment screw. You'll see this screw right here. As you push it down, here's your throttle. And this is actually how you adjust your idle. You basically screw that screw down until it touches the throttle, and you just open the throttle a little bit. That's as simple as it is. You can't do much simpler than that. Well, you need a screw in the factory settings to come down in here and screw that in. So I bought this aftermarket so that if I'm standing at a stoplight in the middle of the summer and I want to, my idle is just a tad bit high, I can just kind of turn it a half turn and get it down to about 900, 950, somewhere in there, which is what the factory does. Because throughout the year, if it's 30 degrees out or 100 degrees out, that is a big air density shift. So maybe once a season you might see me turn it if I happen to notice it. And I like having that ability right there. The second thing I did was for the air screw mixture, which you look at diagrams and you look at the legend, it'll tell you right there. Most Harleys, they plug that up from the factory and you have to drill a hole and pull that out. Everybody's talked about that one. But then you have to use a screwdriver like this to adjust it. You stick that way in there to get to the screw and adjust it like that. I never liked that. So I switched mine out to a thumb adjuster. So I can adjust this, screw it all the way in and then count my screws and my turns out. So there's half a turn, 1 turn, 1.5, 2 turns, and adjust it there. And really, this is a set and forget it pretty much, but getting it just perfect, I just like having this instead of having to do this because I can do it on the fly. It's a convenience factor, but both of these parts are, sub $5 accessories that you can get for your carburetor. And if you're doing all this work, it's a good time to go ahead and do that one. But before I do any work, I just want to spend a little bit of time and just clean the outside out, so I know that I'm not tracking any grime in there with my fingers as I do the interior stuff. Starting with my beloved tub of towels. I really don't know the solvent that they use on this, but it does work good. And they don't pay me to say this stuff. I like the stuff. And if you're going to use carb cleaner, no, use it like somebody else paid for it. Oh, and this stuff is not good for your hands, so you'd probably be wise to use some gloves, but I'm old. Now, the factory carburetor from Harley-Davidson is what they call a CV carburetor. CV stands for constant velocity, meaning the air going through it is always going through it at the same rate. And this carburetor delivers fuel 3 different ways. So real quickly, I'm going to just go over some very basic science right now, stuff you probably saw in elementary school, and that's simply because I used to be a teacher and I kind of want you to understand it, how it works. But the minutia details of why it works, we don't really need to know to make it work. Now, I'm sure y'all have all done this in elementary school, but you take a jar and you fill it with water. It really does help out if it is a Tostitos jar. Then you just take a normal straw and you drop it in there. And this is the same kind of principle we use for using those airbrush artwork and stuff like that, where we want to suck the fuel up through the straw, not the thing. So all we do is we pass air over the top of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this air gun right here, and I'm going to move it over the top, and you'll actually see the bloom of water coming out. So right now, well, that's basically all a carburetor is doing. You know, you have the float bowl fills up with fuel, and here is the air direction. Notice that the inlet side is big and it shrinks down to a smaller size here. And then if you look back at the motorcycle itself, each side basically shrinks down even farther. So, you know, kind of like holding your thumb over your water hose, you know, the water speeds up the smaller the hole you get. So this is how it's taking a lot of air and speeding it up, creating a consistent velocity going across the openings. And this is not one, but inside there, our jets are basically just holes that the fuel gets shot through as the air passes over it. Now, obviously, you open up the throttle, more air goes in, so we want to do more fuel and stuff like that. So basically, they are doing two different ways of controlling the way the fuel is going through those tubes into the airflow. And how it increases the airflow is this little thing right here. It's a slide. That is not controlled by your throttle. That's actually controlled by a vacuum, okay? So as your cylinders go up and down, and you know they burn more fuel, so they start going faster, well, they create more of a vacuum coming through. So it's wanting to suck more air in than the volume that it already has. So this right here is a differential between what the air is coming into the engine and what it's wanting to get. So if you notice, if I shoot air into that little pocket, it raises the slide. And that slide just operates by itself to create an equilibrium between the vacuum of what the engine is wanting and the air coming through it. It keeps the velocity, remember, constant velocity, even throughout. So when you're burning more fuel, meaning you're sucking more air because the air-fuel mixture is consistent all the time, well, it just allows more air to get in so you can burn more fuel and go faster. But a second ago, I just told you it uses that straw concept two different ways. And those two different ways are ways to control the amount of fuel passing through that straw. Now, please use your imagination here, but I have a cardboard tube that has the jet between the fuel below and the air flowing on top. And we can actually control the amount of pull coming through a couple different ways. We can take something like a cone and attach it to a screw and permanently set it up so there's an obstruction into the cone, into the jet, so that it's only open a certain amount all the time. It is consistent. So the only way you can get more fuel coming through this is to increase the volume of air. Remember, the velocity is the same. So if you create more air coming through, the air-fuel mixture wants to stay at that 1 in 18% range. So the more air, more fuel. But that only operates to a certain point. This is fixed. There is a point where the volume of air coming through just doesn't kind of mix to your desired ratio. That's why this is called an idle jet, where the blockage of the tube is fixed to a certain ratio, and that blockage is your air-fuel mixture. This jet right here kind of controls how the bike idles. And really, if you're just putzing around town, a quarter throttle and stuff like that, it's not a lot of volume going through the carburetor. This is what you're working off of. The other way to do it is pretend that it's a long cone coming through, and, get your dirty jokes out of the way right now, but basically we're going to slide it in, and if that cone is the same size as the tube and it tapers as it goes down, well, as this rises up, you can see that the opening, the blockage is less and less and less. And the cool thing is you can adjust that taper. A lot of times, this is called the needle in the carburetor. It is very parallel for a long time, and then it begins to taper. So it has to slide up quite a bit before it starts opening up. And different shaped needles will open up at different levels. And you remember that vacuum slide coming through? Well, it was determined by the amount of volume coming through. So if the idle adjuster is fixed and it's taking care of how the carburetor works at a quarter throttle or just putzing around town, but then you open it all the way up and there's too much air volume going through to be handled by this. Well, if you had something that slid up with that volume and opened up at a certain volume mixture, well, that can give you more gas at the higher volumes. So you have one blockage that's fixed and another that slides up and down, opening and closing it. And that gives you two different ways of getting more fuel into the airflow to make more bang, make you go a lot easier. But I did tell you originally that there were three ways this thing delivers fuel. And this is the problem some people say with constant velocity carburetors, in that when you wick the throttle open, there's a delay factor. Remember, the engine's making more vacuum than the air coming through, so that slide comes up, and then it's just a little bit slower when you just whip that throttle wide full open. So it actually has a function where it just takes a squirt gun and squirts gas into it. And that is what this little thing right here is. It is a squirt gun, and it just shoots fuel in here. And I'll put a little picture inset right here after I've got it all assembled, and I just whip the throttle open, and you can see it squirting fuel in. And that is basically kind of like on your weed eater or something like that, where you have to push the button a few times to get started. Well, if you've ever heard people say, you know, blip the throttle twice before you hit the starter button with carburetor bikes, that's what it's doing. It's kind of priming a little bit of extra gas in there to make starting easier. But if you do that too much, it floods it because the air fuel mixture gets way too off and it won't fire. So there are three ways that carburetor allows fuel to go into the cylinder. One is a fixed blockage, which gives you a consistent air-fuel ratio. The other is a mobile blockage that will open and close depending upon the volume of air going past it. And then the other is just a squirt gun. Okay, enough blathering. I would suggest you don't have to take the carburetor off to do what I'm about to show you to do, but it does make life easier, and it also films better. And if you do take it off, or not, I guess, I would suggest finding some, box top or something like that, and just lining it with something clean for you to drop any parts you're going to be using. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off the float bowl, all that parts right here. And what we have right here is this is where the vent that drains the fuel out of the float bowl. So if you're ever leaving your bike for a long period of time, you can open up this screw right here, and that will actually drain out all the gas in the float bowl, so you won't worry about it clogging up the jets. But we really don't need to mess with that for what we're doing today. Also, if the squirt gun part of your carburetor is not working properly, a lot of times it's in this part right here. You can take that off. There's a little plunger, a little rubber thing right there that when they get old, they sometimes deteriorate or rip or something like that. And you just take that off and replace that. I don't think we're going to have to do anything right here. All we're doing is cleaning out the bowl and the jets today. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and take off these screws and work from there. So when you do this, make sure you use a screwdriver that's going to fully seat into the screw. That way there's less chance of stripping it, because these are very commonly stripped out. And then also put a lot of downward pressure onto them in order to remove them. Just slow, easy pressure down and in twist. Now when you remove it, notice that the squirt gun mechanism is also attached to it. So there's a little rod that you can kind of see, it's the top of it right there. Can you see the little piece of silver at the top, right about where my thumb is? Right about where my thumb is. Well, that sometimes will come out. So I'm just going to give you a light tap to break loose the gasket. and then it should just pull straight down. Let's see. There's that rod. So we have a plastic float bowl in this, and you can see it comes down, and then it moves back up, and it's moving this little portion right there. Can you see that when it goes up? All that is just like your toilet. You have the little float that rises up to turn the water off, and then it comes down. And evidently it's supposed to rise up, so I think it's level, but I'm not 100% sure of that one. Either way, we're not going to really worry about that one. Pros might bend that out, and we might be, and if the float ever goes bad or something like that, you might have to adjust it, but we're not having that problem, so why make more of a problem by trying to fix that? Next up, we have this right here, and that's just 16,000 miles worth of gas evaporating and a little dirt or something in the gas that floats down to the bottom of it and just kind of crusties up. We'll clean that out. I will tell you this, whenever I ride about a half mile from my house, I typically will turn the petcock off so that my bike runs out of gas right about when I get home. So that if there is any gas, it's just sitting at that little bottom, and that would explain why my float bowl is clean all the way around, because it's just the gas that's at the bottom that's evaporating and leaving the little schmutz around. And I did not buy another gasket here, so I'm just being very careful removing that. I'm looking at it, and typically a gasket is toast whenever you start getting flat spots on it, which, looking at the light reflecting off of that, I probably should put a new one on here, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to clean it up. And a little squirt in here. Let it sit a little bit. And then scrub it down with a paper towel, and that gets most of it out. Now, the first thing we're going to clean is our drain line. Remember me talking, this is what you undo to drain your float bowl if you're leaving it for a long time, or just be like me and run it dry. Well, this tube right here, notice where it sits, slightly above that one. So if the gas ever gets too high up in here, it'll go in that tube and come out and drip out. This is a valve at the bottom of it. You'll see a little hole right at the very bottom in there. That's the hole that screw opens and closes, but this remains open for fuel to just flow out. So let's clean out both of those just to be sure. So I'm just going to kind of put the tube right there and give it a squirt and hope that stuff comes out the hose right here. Voila. So that's cleaned out. And then if I plug this side and squirt in here, it should come out that tube right there. And basically, us cleaning it is sticking this Berryman's carb cleaner in every single hole we find and making sure it works, because the smart people wouldn't put, and obviously since I hadn't opened that up, it just came right back out. So first we have to open this up to make that clean, make sure that's cleaned out. Yep. Our whole purpose in cleaning is to just make sure all the holes are opened up to their certain level, because the smart people wouldn't put a hole in if they didn't want it to be a hole. If it's clogged, it's no good. So now I'm just going to put the gasket on, and we are done with this part. In case I forget to tell you this one, this gasket is, I've always found them to be slightly too small, so there's a little tension on them, so you kind of have to push them down in and make sure they are in all the way around. They have a tendency to pop out when you're assembling it, thus pinching it, thus creating a small leak right here. So if you reassemble everything and you have a small leak at your bowl, it's probably just the gasket got pinched. If it does get pinched, go ahead and get a new one. no sense risking a future leak there. So on this side we have our toilet bowl float. It comes up and turns gas on, and that's this little thing right here. Can you see that? That's as close as I can get the camera and stay in focus. Well, it's a little big plunger, and whenever you push it up, it turns the gas off, and whenever the float pole comes down, more gas leaks in. Sometimes that gets hung up so that no gas comes in. What you do then is just turn the petcock off on your gas, and all the gas will come out of the float bowl, and that will kind of open it all the way up. And then if you turn the gas on, all of a sudden it kind of jars it, and whatever trash will come down into the float bowl and just stay there and not really worry about anything. That's only happened to be once, but turning the gas off, letting the float bowl drain empty, and then letting it fill up really quickly will kind of jar that sometimes. But there's nothing really in here. I'm looking in there. It's all super clean, so I'm not going to worry about that. If you needed to take this off, this little pin right here is not held in by anything other than the two sides of the float bowl right there. It's held in between those. So you can push that out, slide the float off, and then that little plunger mechanism will come right out. And you can clean that if you want. I'm not having problems. I'm not going to mess with that. So now let's turn our attention to the jets. But first, let me show you how they've been working so far. Rear cylinder, front cylinder. Rear cylinder, front cylinder. So both of these tell me how the bike has been running. I've been running on these for 5,000 miles. I basically swap out my spark plugs every time I do an oil change, and they are quite dirty. They're kind of sooty. They aren't really oily. So this tells me that I am burning too much fuel. They are very rich. Now, whenever I got my bike, this was a factory jetting setup, and the bike came from the previous owner with Vance and Hines, and they didn't change any of the jets. So the first thing I did was swap out the jets to what the smarter people told me, because bikes come from the factory a little bit lean to meet emissions, and then when you put an exhaust system and a free breather air cleaner on it, which the prior owner had, it just gets even leaner. Now, what all the people told, the factory settings was a 42 idle jet and a 180 main jet. What do those numbers mean? I don't know. I don't really care. All I know is as the numbers get bigger, it puts more fuel in. So if I have a 42 idle jet and everyone's telling me put a 45 idle jet in because it's too lean, well, 42 to 45, more gas. Makes sense to me. I also put in a 185 main jet. Some people were saying go bigger. Some people were saying leave it alone. I just didn't want to get in here anymore, so I just went ahead and put one in because it's better to be a slightly bit rich than too lean. It'll run cooler rich, but it does, put carbon deposits on the tops of your pistons and your spark plugs, which long term could affect things. But running lean, it will run hot, which running lean's worse. The problem is, if you've watched my earlier videos, is that Vance and Hines exhaust system, it was just too loud for my personal taste for a daily driver. So I went ahead and got stock exhaust put back on it. So basically, I jetted this perfect for a more freer flowing exhaust system, but whenever I put a more restrictive exhaust system on, it was a tad bit rich, which is what these spark plugs has shown me. But I've been running it like this for 15,000 miles, so I don't think it's that big a deal. Remember me saying, it doesn't have to be 100% race team tuned perfect. As long as it's running, it's not spitting, it's not bogging or anything like that, you're okay. Which, talking to people smarter than me, and all the references, stuff like that. Everybody has told me I want to stick with the 45 for the idle jet because that's just where it runs best. But I could go down, make a little bit leaner on the main jet. So that's what I'm going to do. And that might give me a little bit more fuel efficiency for these long trips. And it will probably be more where it should be for the factory exhaust system. So I'm going to swap this one out for a brand new one. Now the main jet actually comes in two parts. You have the main jet, and then I forget what that other part's called. The main jet you take off with a screwdriver. The other one you take off with a wrench. Now, this is every single used one of these I've ever seen is just damaged all to hell because people use the wrong kind of screwdriver. If you just use a regular screwdriver, notice that the taper on the screwdriver, can you see that right there? It's as far in as I can zoom in. Well, basically, you're only touching the very corners of this soft piece of metal. So when you turn it, it just kind of damages it all up. What you want to use is a screwdriver where the two sides have been ground so that they are parallel, so it fits in that slot and it sits all the way down so that you can put the torque on it without damaging it. And I don't know what, I mean, even experienced mechanics, they just don't seem to care about this part, but you just slowly twist it out. And there we go. And if you get good seated, you shouldn't damage it. I wasn't perfect on that one, but really all we're concerned with is a hole in the metal. And once again, this part right here I replaced, and it should be labeled 185 somewhere, but this was probably a cheap, oh, there's some kind of writing right there on the side. Let me use my magnifier. Sure enough, it says 1.85. So I'm going to stick a 180 in there, thus making it smaller. Now, just for your information, a lot of old school guys, they would, if they wanted to make a jet bigger, they would use drills to drill out that center section. I don't know if I'm trying to look at a camera through a phone. They would just drill out that certain section to a certain size, and they wouldn't worry about what number it is. Just drill per whatever size they want. But you can look at that one, and that's pretty cleaned out. It wasn't clogged at all. If it is clogged, you can use the wire from a brass brush. Just pull one out and kind of push it through to break loose the clog, and then it's just a matter of sticking this through and squirting it to clean it out the rest of the way. So here's the factory one, and it is a 180. So I'm simply going to put it back in, and if you have the right size screwdriver, bits stay on there because they're parallel, lots of friction. When you're installing something like this, I will always turn backwards until I feel that first tooth click in, and then I'll go forward. That way I'm fairly sure I will not be stripping it. And then just center my screwdriver and seat it as best I can. Voila. While I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and take the other part out and make sure that is all clean. And see what this one has is a bunch of holes on the side. So it's a hole going through the center. So we have the hole that's going all the way through the center, and you can see it's got a little bit of schmutz on the inside of it, but it's also these holes on the side that we want to worry about. Okay, so how I clean that is a good squirt through. And then I will put my finger on the bottom, put the nozzle in there, and give it a squirt. Make sure your eyes aren't in the way. And make sure it comes out of every single hole. All four there. Those two it comes out. All four there. those three. Well, that one has three. Let's make sure I have the third one coming out. Yep, all three. Now I want you to notice, see, that's got a hole right there. But if we look inside, see that right there? That is the bottom of the needle. The needle will float in there. That's that long, thin thing that slides up and down. So this main jet is the one where the needle opens and closes it as that slide goes up and down. So I've got it seated, and basically you just want to secure that until it's snug. Don't go too crazy. Next, I want to take a look at the idle jet. But this is kind of a blind one where I'm going to slide the screwdriver in the hole and then find the slot just by feel and then unscrew it. Voila. So what we have is I kind of damaged it a little bit pulling it out. I'm looking, it is a number 45, so I want to leave that in there. And sometimes if it has a K, you can tell it's from the factory, but this is one I've obviously put in that's aftermarket, so it's not labeled K from the factory. And it too has hole down the center, which you can see how tiny that is, and then holes on the side. So once again, I'm going to clean that out, and we will take a look at how it looks like afterwards, and then the sides. Finger on the end. So now let's look after one squirt through and see how well the cleaner did. And what do you know? The hole is a little bit bigger. So there must have been some gunk in there that was gumping it up a little bit. So reassembly is just sliding it in, and it'd be pretty hard to cross thread this piece because of how it's designed, but you will definitely feel some resistance when you hit bottom. Next, I'm going to take the idle adjustment screw out and just make sure everything is somewhat clean right there. Now this part does have a spring on the inside if I remember correctly, but you can see it's just a little tiny pin, but you can see it's just a little tiny cone that goes into that main jet, and you can see that tip of it is pretty clean. That's probably what's in the main jet, and the rest of it's clogged up from the fuel going past it. So we're just going to clean that off and reinstall it. A little squirt on a rag. Wipe it down. Nice and clean, ready to go back in. Now, something about the air screw mixture. Experts will tell you you want to go between 1.5 and 2 screws out. So whenever you adjust these things, you always screw them all the way in until they stop coming in. You don't need to push it too far. And you may notice that I have a scratch right here. I'll try and make it deeper for you right now. So that's my reference point. So basically 1/2, 1.5, and they always tell you go 1.5 to 2. So I'm just going to split the difference. So I'm 1 3/4 screws out. That's a baseline. And then over the next 1,000 miles, every 500 miles, I will pull out my new plugs and look at them and see if they are rich or they are lean. You either go in or out for the screw, but I'll have to look that up whenever I get to that point. But that's how the adjustments are done. One way goes richer, one way goes leaner, and you can adjust that once you get it dialed. So this is a nice dark tan instead of black. Well, then you're set. You don't ever have to touch that again until you clean it again. So let's reassemble. In putting the base back on, the only thing you need to worry about is getting that one push rod back into that hole and making sure that the O-ring doesn't kind of bend over. And I will always kind of lightly do get all the screws started, but I won't tighten them, and then I'll go back and tighten them all at the end. And once again, while you're doing this, try not to bump it too much because you don't want that O-ring to come out. So this is the last one, and I'm basically getting them fingertip tight. They are all sealed, and then I would just give it one good push and quarter turn to seat them. You don't want to go too crazy. Oh, I forgot to check something, so I'm going to take the air fuel mixture out again. There's that spring I was telling you about. If you notice, if you run your sight line straight up, right there, can you see that little tiny hole right there? Can you see that? We want to make sure that's cleaned out too. So basically, I'm just going to stick the nozzle up and give you a squirt. Yep, so that's clean. So the spring and screw go back in there, and I believe there's also an O-ring, but I'm not worrying about that because it's stuck up inside. Bottom it out. 1 or half, 1, 1 1/2, 1 3/4. Now that hole is behind the butterfly, the throttle opening, and then there's some more in front, but those were taken care of when we were squirting through other passages. I'm noticing the slide is kind of dirty too, so I'm going to go ahead and take the slide and needle out and give those a good cleaning also. Same principle here, though you want to notice that this screw right here is also holding on all this mechanism. So, just be careful there. It's probably easier just to remove all of this first. So once again, press, slow and steady torque until it breaks loose. And there you go. This one has a little tiny spring washer on it, on the side right there. Press, slow pressure until it breaks. Boom. Ease into it. And that comes off just like that. Damn it, see it? Not enough pressure, and I started stripping this one out. I always forget about this brass washer on this one. I don't know why it's there, but the screw that goes with it is typically brass colored to make sure you get the right one in the right spot. Okay, now when you take the last one out, be sure you hold pressure on this one because there is a spring in there and it will want to push that out, and you don't want everything going flying. I do know that some sports guys will put different weight springs in there to adjust the quickness of this vacuum adjuster. I trust that the factory engineers probably knew what they were doing when they did it. So there we go. Spring pushes it out. Pull the spring out. It comes with a little spot right there. It goes right on the cap, as you can see, little holding place right there. And then you have the diaphragm, the slide, and the needle. And it did look kind of dirty in there, doesn't it? Now you can disassemble pull the needle out if you want. Push it through. Notice it has a washer at the top. Can you see that? Some of them will use a C-clip in little grooves. Other times you can put multiple washers on the end, and that basically kind of presets how high the needle will be, so a different portion of the needle will be in the main jet, releasing a certain amount. That is tuning well beyond my level of expertise. I'm just going to leave the 2 washers there and everything else the same, and just give it a good cleaning. Nice and clean now, and make sure I get those 2 washers back on it before they get lost. And now to clean the slide, and be very careful of this piece. It is very easy to rip, and if you rip it, you just got to replace it. I don't know why that's gotten so discolored. If you have any idea, leave a comment down below. Just that one spot. It's almost as if it's slightly deformed too. Probably should get a new bellows or whatever that part's called. Okay, so let's reassemble it. Slide the needle in, make sure it drops down. Slide the part that holds the needle in place down there on the screw. Then make sure this is all cleaned up. Clean up all that. Clean up the vacuum section, or the Now I want you to notice, this is how engineers do stuff. If for some reason you put it in backwards, it is not going to fit. See, these wings are offset a little bit, so it only goes together one way. So it's kind of like they knew we would be stupid and try to put it in backwards, so they don't let us. Then make sure that needle goes in the hole. And there we go. Now, every time I do this one, I have to look it up. And this is a kind of a tricky part, because basically you see this little lip on the diaphragm. Well, it needs to fit in this groove all the way around. Can you see that groove right there? So what the people tell you to do is you stick your thumb on the inside and kind of lift the slide up, and then you're going to fold this bellows over, kind of like that. Once again, it's hard to explain, and it's even harder to do. So once it gets settled, you kind of have to work this around so that it's sitting in that groove all the way around. And it always seems to me like this bellows is too big for that. But eventually, you'll get it somehow. So I've got it now in that groove all the way around. Drop the spring in, make sure that it's well seated on the... Ah, it popped out. Damn it. Very carefully put the top on. And then remember your throttle. This corner right here gets that brass pin along with the different colored screw, but all the other ones get just a regular screw. And I will kind of fingertip tighten them backwards first and then forwards to make sure I get good threading. And when this one goes on, remember you have 2 screws holding it on. But before you do it, check right here to make sure that it's not bound up. Before you tighten it, I should say. Because as you tighten this screw, it brings it over so that that screw should touch. So I basically back the screw out until it's past where it should be touching, and then I can tighten this side screw up to its torque level. And you notice it brings it all over. And then tighten everything else up to your carefully calibrated hand torque wrench. And next time I do it, I probably need to go ahead and replace all 4 of those screws because I kind of wallered one of them out. Now for this idle adjustment, just to be sure, I'm going to tighten it up so it's just touching but not opening the throttle. I want it to just kind of hit the throttle. That way the throttle is dead bottomed out. Whenever I first start this up, it's not going to idle. I should be able to just tighten that up until I get to the idle speed I want. But we are now ready to put it back on the bike. Now understand, normally when people do this, when they disassemble the entire thing, they have all their parts laid out and then clean each part and then reassemble everything. I broke it up for this video to the individual parts and did them one at a time because it made sense for the video. But in reality, just take it all apart and then put it back together. I think you saw that those parts only go back together one way, but it would be much easier to disassemble it, do one task at a time. You got all the disassembly, you got all the cleaning, then you got all the reassembly, and now we put it on the bike and start kind of fiddling with it to tune it. But really the only things we can do at this time is to adjust the air-fuel mixture, but I'm not going to look at that until 1,000 miles from now when I look at the spark plugs. And then the idle speed, because other than that, it's set it and forget it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe picked up a few tips. Understand, I'm a complete idiot. I am the definition of a hack mechanic, but you don't have to be perfect to at least get something working right. And you'll see it working in my upcoming touring videos, point of view of some of the best roads in Texas and around the country this summer. Y'all be safe, have fun, and remember, go out for a motorcycle ride.